Hail, fine citizens of Norath. Welcome to another episode of the Clockwork Mining Corp Podcast. Thanks for joining me, Zaphos, for another episode tonight. We are talking about the death of the Holy Trinity. Oh my goodness, it sounds rather dramatic. What is it all about? What does it mean? Well, the game footage in the background is from EQ Next, Everquest Next, from SOE, Sony Online Entertainment. And we are talking about how Everquest Next have decided in their new and up-and-coming title to remove the Holy Trinity from the game. It will be gone. You will be a healer, tank, DPS no more. The requirement of this will be changed going forward. Is this a good thing? Is this the future? Is this a revolution? Is it a coup? What is this nonsense? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, as the saying goes. Why are we changing it? Let's talk about it together. For those of you who don't know, the Holy Trinity is based on the concept that you should have a DPS class, a tank class, and a healer class. You can have multiple DPS, but at least one tank and one healer are required for any sustainable group. That's kind of been the concept now for 20 years, if not longer. That's really what it boils down to. If you've played World of Warcraft, you've been in the midst of it. If you've played other games, you've been in the midst of it. If you've played EverQuest, you've been in the midst of it. If you've played EverQuest 2, you've been involved with it. Basically, it's been in every major MMO title in existence, bar a couple that were quite spectacularly brilliant, like Ultima Online, but even those had certain types of roles. Now, that being said, this has given us a definitive role as players. We know that we're the best healer in the universe. We know that we're keeping our group alive. We know that because you have me, the greatest healer in the universe, you will survive things that no other healer could heal you through. I am a god among men. That is essentially, how some people look at this. And it's a fairly fair and accurate thing to say. A healer does amazing things. A tank can do amazing things. And DPS bring it all together as the glue. It's a very tried and true method of building a group and engaging in raids, engaging in encounters. It creates organization. It creates process. Now, what happens when you get rid of all that? You essentially are left with chaos. You have 40 people or 200 people or however many people all going at it against some monster or boss that there's no order to. There's no concept of, well, what is that boss doing? How can we mitigate that boss's special attacks? Nobody cares because there's no organization. So with that being said, the feeling left by a lot of players recently has been, hey, look at Guild Wars 2, this didn't work. Look at other games where this didn't work. Basically, the feeling among a lot of EQ players is, hey, this is terrible. You're taking away my identity. You're devaluing me as a player. You're insulting me. It's been a very negative thing for a lot of players. Other players, on the other hand, think it's great. Where do I fall? I fall really on the side of getting rid of the Holy Trinity. And we'll talk about why in a moment. But there are good reasons why, and there are good reasons not yet revealed in the game as to why. And maybe they're not good reasons at all. Maybe we should keep it. But let's find out, and hopefully you'll tell me what you think in the comments below. But basically, the idea behind this, as I said, is to give organization, to give structure, to give roles, to give purpose. And it does all of that tremendously well. Basically, the tank goes up and stands in front of the boss and soaks up all the boss's damage while the healer heals that tank so that the tank can continue to do that and keep the boss occupied while 200 other people beat the living snot out of the boss with, magic arrows, steely daggers, and all kinds of, mechanical devices. So that's generally the idea. If the tank loses aggro, so to speak, if the tank loses control of that boss, the boss rampages around the room and kills everybody. If the healer fails to heal the tank, if the healer fails to keep the tank alive, and might I add most of the rest of the raid, then again, the entire group will wipe. It's a fairly fundamental principle that's been proven time and time again. So why get rid of it? What's the advantage? One of the main reasons behind having this kind of setup is because the artificial intelligence, the AI, or the governing principles of script and control that govern these bosses and monsters in video games, the way that they're programmed, the way that they're built and designed is very rudimentary. It's very simple. It's a very elementary way of doing things. Basically, there's a threat table built into the creature. The monster has a concept of threat, and it looks at the warrior who is taunting it, and taunt is a way to supercharge threat. So every time the warrior taunts, basically that threat meter goes through the roof, and the monster has no choice but to focus entirely on the greatest threat, which is the warrior. So threat meter or aggro mechanics are something that have been used by developers to build different types of encounters, but they're very rudimentary. The monster has no awareness of the greater raid group except where they fit on the threat meter. So overall, unless there are scripted unless there are scripted random events such as boss cast AoE that can hit everyone, it's not that the boss is trying to hit everyone because it wants to kill you, the DPS in the back. It's doing it because it's scripted to do that at a certain point in time or randomly. It is not really intelligent in any particular way. Now, there's all sorts of other mechanics I'm glossing over here, and there's much more complexities to it that I'm glossing over. Developers have done a great job in evolving this over the years. But ultimately, it's not a smart system. It's a scripted system. Now, the difference that's going to be brought into EQ Next is having smart intelligence. It's actual intelligence, artificial intelligence. The design behind the creatures is that they have a will of their own. They have awareness. They have knowledge of things in the universe, and so forth and so on. Therefore, you start to question the need, or the capability, in fact, to taunt a creature. A creature recognizing that it is being taunted could very easily decide, screw you, I'm not going to be taunted, I'm just going to walk away. They don't do that in regular games like World of Warcraft or EQ1 because they're scripted not to. They're scripted to obey the threat meter, and therefore they're locked into the warrior and it all works. Whenever you allow a creature to decide on its own what the greatest threat is, based on its internal AI, you have a completely different situation. Now, that's one aspect of getting rid of the Holy Trinity. It may not be necessary, it may not be practical, it may not be enforceable. Therefore, you walk into your raid, and the big boss is at the front, and you say, okay, Bob, you heal us, Sam, you tank, everybody else, give it everything you've got. You walk in there, and you don't have a taunt for a start, because the taunt mechanic and threat mechanic aren't in the game. The tank goes up to the boss, tries to get its attention, and sure enough it does. Next thing you know, the whole crowd behind him unload on the boss. The boss turns around and AoEs them all down, and they all die. It's potentially one possible scenario, right? The point being, the boss just decided to ignore the tank because it was no longer a really big problem. It's like, well, this tank hasn't done that much damage to me. I'm just going to go over there and swat these guys that are starting to really get on my nerves. So, that's a way, that's instead of having a threat meter, that's a way that the boss has decided what the greatest threat was. Likewise, in the same situation, the boss could turn around and just kill the healer, because the healer is a greater threat. Now, there are some mechanics in current boss encounters that do that, but again, what we're talking about here is a boss that is aware, a boss that can make decisions, a boss that can change tactics, a boss that can see what you're doing and respond accordingly, and respond in different ways every time. That is very unique. That is something we don't have, and that is a dynamic encounter. And dynamic encounters don't respond well to environments that have forced and fixed roles. Dynamic encounters are really there and really require the group to be more self-sufficient, to have the ability to be more self-sufficient, because they're not walking into a scripted event that can be controlled, analyzed, understood, and repeated. They're walking into something that could be different 5 or 6 or 7 times out of 10. Basically, you need to be able to respond to those dynamic events. And the ability to respond gives out this sort of necessity to give players a more diverse set of capabilities. Having a role within a game like that, like EQ Next, that has these dynamic events, that has dynamic encounters, that has true AI, giving, say, one class a total dedication to be a tank, is actually gimping them. Is actually making them have less fun than everybody else, because they're not going to be able to play well in a dynamic environment when they can only do one thing. That's just not going to fly. The other thing about being forced into healer roles and that kind of thing is that it's just not fun to be sitting around saying, looking for healer. At 2 o'clock in the morning when you want to go out and have a grand adventure because you're hopped up in cola till the wee hours of the morning, and you can't because all your buddies are asleep and you don't know anybody and there's no healers around who aren't already in a group or whatever. It's a real bummer. It's really annoying, and especially in games where it's an absolute necessity to have a healer, where it's absolutely essential or you can't do anything. It really locks down the game and ruins the fun for anybody else. It really makes you dependent upon healers. It gives them an unusual amount of power, which isn't great in a modern MMO, especially not one like EQ Next with these types of systems in it. The same thing goes for a tank. Not only do you have to find a healer at 2 o'clock in the morning, but you also have to find a tank at 2 o'clock in the morning. It also makes it very challenging. Now, there's also pros to that, of course. There are great pros to that too. But what I'm saying is, in modern MMOs, whether we like it or not, they're mainstream. Everquest was a little more niche, and always has been a little more niche. Ultima Online was a little more niche. Darkfall on Holy Wars is a little more niche. basically, we want to open up the game to the world. Maybe some people don't, but in my opinion, a company like SOE wants millions of people to play EQ Next. And we as the players want millions of people involved so that the game has a long and healthy life. Having millions of players is really something that is only possible with accessibility. And having complex role-based Holy Trinity systems is something that a lot of people don't find appealing. A lot of people want to be able to do a little bit of everything. Casual players, oh my goodness, here's a potential can of worms, but casual players want to be able to get on the game for an hour and accomplish something. And that's almost impossible if you play a game where you are required to get a tank and a healer before you can get anything done. And I know hardcore players will say, well, screw them, who cares? But the casual players make up the bulk of the available player base for any current modern game. And modern games as a business still have to make money, guys. So that's important. Games that don't make money fail, and games that fail go away. And we don't want that for EQ Next. We want it to be around for a long, long time. So my opinion on the matter is that stepping away from the Holy Trinity is probably a good thing. Why? It's going to open up player freedoms to a greater degree. It's going to open up different types of play style. It's going to allow us to do things without the requirement of waiting around for specific group makeup. It's going to make actually community engagement easier because you're going to be able to say, hey, buddy 1, 2, and 3, let's go. We don't need to worry about what particular role you are because we can just all sort of make it work. And the other thing that comes along to support this is multiclassing. So here comes multiclassing that allows you to go out into the world and say, hey, we need a little bit more defensive capability in this group. Can you go a little bit more defensive? We need more utility. Can you swap out class and become a little more utilitarian for us for this encounter? And you can actually change on the fly. You can try different tactics on the fly if you get defeated. That's an amazing system. It's absolutely fantastic. Again, that system wouldn't make much sense in an environment where everybody is a dedicated role. It would be less meaningful and therefore less fun because having 40 classes to choose from is freaking awesome. So again, that's a consideration to keep in mind when we're looking at how the game is built. The game is built around this concept of flexibility, in my opinion. At the same time, I do believe that some of the concerns should be sort of alleviated. I believe there will be healing of some kind in the game. Now, it's not been confirmed one way or the other, but I think there should be some kind of healing in the game that all players will have access to if they get that class. I think that there will be tankiness in the game. You won't be a tank, but you can be highly defensive. And you can build yourself accordingly. You can build your action bar accordingly. The weapon that you choose, whether shield or two-hander. You can, build your different class around it. You can put items on, like sockets or whatever you want to call it. You can augment your gear to be more friendly towards that end. So there's lots of things that you can do that make you tankier, that make you more healer-orientated, that make you more utility-orientated or more DPS-orientated. So the game is still built around these 4 core elements. EQ Next is built around movement, offense, defense, and utility. So when you combine those together, you have a very rich, environment in which to play. You have a very rich set of choices to make in terms of how you play and what way you want to play and what way the group makeup plays together. Maybe if one person in the group has great movement capabilities on the battlefield and others don't, maybe that hurts the group. Maybe you need to change it up and give everybody movement abilities. It's hard to say at this point. But my reasoning and thinking here is that the Holy Trinity is too rigid. It's too strict. It doesn't fit well within that world. And yet that world is the future of MMO gaming. That's where things are going. We want all those great divergent dynamic options. We want all those great cool AIs. We want all these great abilities to go out and have grand adventures, and we can only do that in a dynamic world. And in a dynamic world, rigid stoic class systems, rigid stoic roles don't have as much of a part. I also think that people are going to find it easier to get comfortable with their roles and being able to offer utility. There's going to be crowd control. We've seen that already in some of the videos. You're going to be able to crowd control. There's going to be utility spells and capabilities, and people who really want to be that integral utilitarian role are going to be able to play that way. And I think they'll find that very satisfying if they're used to being a healer or a tank. So those are some of my thoughts on the whole thing. I do believe that this is the right step. I believe it's the right thing to do. I also think it ties very much into the concept that this is a voxel-created world, and in that world, a caster, a sorcerer, can conjure up a wall of earth. And that wall of earth is actually legitimately physical voxels. It's actually physically there. The monster has to break it down to get through it. It's not just some kind of energy barrier that times out after 5 seconds. It's an actual physical addition to the game world. voxels have been manipulated and forced upwards, and a wall now exists where one did not exist before, and the orcs coming at you from, down the road will have to break through it to get to you. That kind of tactical gameplay is very different than what you would see in a scripted encounter where, the tank runs up and taunts them, and the healer heals, and the DPS, fire arrows at them or whatever. That's very different tactically speaking. So I think that type of tactical combat is going to be much more oriented around dynamic events, emergent AI, very much a multi-class system, and the ability to have flexible roles as and when needed. And for everybody to have the ability to sustain themselves, move, defend, be utility, be all the things that they need to be in the universe to be successful. I think it's a really great system. I'm really excited about it. I would encourage everyone to approach it with a certain degree of caution if you don't like it, and a kind of a wait-and-see attitude, because I believe this is the future of MMO gaming. I believe that Sony have done something very special, and I really believe what they said, that will you remember where you were when EQ Next was announced? And certainly I will, because I believe that if they pull this off, they'll have done something very special in the gaming world, and something that will completely change the direction of massively multiplayer online gaming forever. And I'm very excited to see what they do with it. I think we're entering some great times after coming out of some very dark times in massively multiplayer online gaming. I'm very excited about it, and I think you guys should be too. But let me know what you think. I know there's a lot of passion still pent up around this topic, but will you give it a shot? Will you open your mind? Will you allow it to develop and see what comes? I think that would be a great idea, but let me know what you think. Thanks, guys, for joining me again for another Clockwork Mining Corp podcast. Next time, we'll talk about another topic, and we'll continue to dive into EQ Next as we anticipate with bated breath the launch of EQ Next Landmarks. Take it easy, guys. Take care, and travel safe.